which is called cache. So I can also call it as an OBIEE cache. Right, so what exactly is the cache, and how do we really use this cache, and how do we implement this cache? And first of all, what is cache? So now, if you look at any applications these days, any BI applications, or most of the applications, right, where we talk about kind of a volumes of data that we process, or we use the cache. Even like in Google also, right, so when it is searching, it does a lot of cache. It uses a lot of cache servers where the data is cached in between you and the actual servers. So cache is basically, it's a kind of a temporary data that sits uh, closer to you. So I mean, if you take an example of a browser, okay, so browser has its own cache. So in other words, when you're browsing the data, when you access any website kind of for the second time, so more or less you are using the cached information uh, at least to the maximum extent. So in the sense, cache is something you maintain in your local system, or the system that is closer to you. So that way, you don't really go all the way to the server to pull the entire information to you. So even within OBIEE, so we maintain kind of a cache environment, or we maintain some cache with us, so that for every small request we don't need to go all the way to the back to the sources. So I'll give you kind of a simple example how the cache works, because end of the day, in this, like, in the essential thing and the important thing that you need to understand is how exactly the cache works, and the mechanism of the cache. The rest of the things are self-explanatory. You can go there and you can do the things on your own. But again, identifying the importance of the cache, what it does is important to know, so the rest of the things fall in place. Right, so assuming that I have a user. This is my user, where now the user is actually accessing a website. Okay, so now say probably the website could be, say I can give the name of the website as cnn.com, or any other website of your choice, so doesn't matter. So now if I'm my user who's accessing the website, obviously my client, and he uses a client tool, so obviously the client tool could be any browser. I say Firefox, assuming. So Firefox is the browser that my user may be using, so obviously he makes a request to the server, right? So now when my user makes a request to the server, so for the first time, okay, so assuming that on my cnn.com, say there are 100 files available. So now if I have to kind of display the user cnn.com, so what I need to do is I would need to download these 100 files onto the browser and display them, right? So now if that is the case, what happens, my browser downloads all these 100 files and displays the website to the user. So now in the local of the browser, what it does is it will maintain something called cache. So inside the browser itself, in the local system where my browser exists, so this we call it as cache. So now what does this cache will do? I mean, how does this cache mechanism works? Is basically where my browser, I mean, when I say user here, like it's the browser. Okay, so browser writes the data into the cache, and it will also read the data from the cache. It's kind of capable of reading into writing in. So now what happens is when you access the first time, so there is no file available in the cache, because before you access it for the first time, so for CNN.com, there is no file, assuming that you have not used CNN.com. This is the first time that you're using. Okay, there is no file for CNN.com available in the cache, and there are 100 files available. When you access for the first time, what happens is it will download all these 100 files to the local, which means it will display the CNN.com website to you, but at the same time, in the background, it will download all the 100 files. Obviously, when you are looking at the CNN.com it means you have downloaded all the 100 files to your browser, right? So now what it will do is whatever the 100 files that is downloaded to the browser, which is displayed to you, will be stored in a cache location within the browser somewhere. When I say browser, the browser has some dedicated location, C drive or D drive. Within the location of the browser, it will store all these 100 files somewhere. So that is what I call it as a cache. So now when you access the CNN.com tomorrow, assuming, so now assuming that in CNN.com, so now I have like 120 files. Now this time I don't have 100 files, I have 120 files because probably they've added some kind of extra content. Okay, so the difference is, there are 20 files added extra. So what is the difference now? I have 20 files new. But again, so there may be that, out of the existing 100 files, there may be some changes to another 20 files. So here, out of 100 files of yesterday, when I compare with yesterday, so there is a 20 new files added, okay, and at the same time, out of 100 existing files, there may be 20 files changed. So together, when I access my CNN.com tomorrow, now what my server will do, what my browser will do, my browser will send a request to the CNN.com, and it doesn't download all the files blindly. What it will do is it will get the list of the files that is available here, and based on the list of the file, it will compare the files that is already available on the cache for the CNN.com. So now based on that information that is available in the cache, and based on the information that is available in the files on the server, what my browser will do, my browser will identify that, okay, this is the strategy where there are 20 files available which are new, there are 20 files available which is different to the files that is available in the local cache, which means it will automatically kind of mark them as changed files or changed data. So now I don't want to really show the old data. So what my browser will decide is, okay, let's get that 20 new files, 20 new files at the same time, 20 files updated. So now when I say 20 files changed and 20 new files, so the rest of the 80 files is as it is. So there is no change in the rest of the 80 files. So what my browser do is, my browser use the 80 files from the local cache, and it will download is only 40 files and display my website. So that way, what it is doing, it is making sure that it's not unnecessarily downloading everything from the server. So it's not downloading 120 files, rather it is downloading only 40 files, which means you have kind of 3 times faster than a normal speed, right? If you download 120 files, it's like it will take a lot of time. So instead of since you're getting only 40 files and rest of the 80 files you're taking it from the local system, so it is 3 times faster than the normal processing. So that's how my cache mechanism works. So here the browser which I'm talking about will take care of maintaining this cache and releasing deleting this cache and identifying the changes and all the stuff. So this is the feature inbuilt within the browser that knows how to manage this cache for you. So sometimes when you're browsing, right, if you think like you are not looking at the right data, or no, it's not getting refreshed properly, you go and delete the cache, right? So we do very often. Okay, so that way we when we delete the cache, what happens? Nothing in the cache. So every time you make a request, since it doesn't find anything from the cache, it will directly go to the server. From the server, it will get the files and display. So similarly, even with the OBIEE, so if you kind of considering the this as OBIEE, Now OBIEE also does this kind of same thing. So when we make a request to the server, which is here I'm talking about, is it's a database because where my data is available. So when I when I'm running the report, when I run any report, so what happens, even OBIEE, for the first time it will go to the database, and from the database it will get the data, and it will store the data inside the cache. So which means all my data that is pulled from the database for this particular report is actually stored in the local file system. So I call this file system as what? Cache. But the only thing that my database cannot do is, like, when you run next time, it doesn't go to the database and verify new data and change data and all the stuff. So it will every time you run it. So for the next time you run it, it will verify if it is available in the cache. It will blindly use that, and it will simply display the data for the user. So in the sense, OBIEE, when you request every time, it doesn't go and compare how is there any new data available, or is how many new records available, what is the old records. That it doesn't do it, because again, that's a heavy process. It's not like as lightweight as a browser, right? Because browser is a lightweight utility, and we are also talking about here we're talking about small number of files and all the stuff. But again, when it comes to the OBIEE, it has to go and verify, compare, and all. It's gonna be a very big process. That's the reason. It's what it does is it will blindly see if the same query has executed before. So then it will maintain the data in the cache. So it will pull the data from the cache and display it to you. So if you enable the cache, if you run a report, first time you run the report, there is no cache available. What it will do, it will simply go to the database, and from the database it will pull the data and display it as a report to you. And when you run it the next time, so it identifies the data in the cache, it will simply pull the data from the cache. That's it. Simply pull the data from the cache and display it to you. So that way, uh, it's a good performance, like, rather than going all the way to the server and pull the data, and it displays the data from the cache itself. So if you look at here, there's two advantages here. One, your report is faster because you're getting it from the local system, and no, and the second thing is you are not loading your database here. So because if I send the request to the database, my database get loaded, right? So the load on the database is less. At the same time, the reports are faster. So that is good. But the only problem is, what about if there is a change in the data? Because the data tend to change, right? So now suppose today the data may not have changed, but tomorrow the data might have changed, right? So that's pretty much possible. So when my data changed in the database, when I get a new data, so it is our responsibility to maintain the cache. So, but probably you can schedule the cache to be deleted at a certain time every day, or you go and manually delete the cache, or you run your own scripts. So the scripts will run and the script will delete the cache. So you can maintain any of this stuff for you, right? So cache cleanup responsibility is ours. Like in our, at least we have to configure within OBIEE somehow saying, when to delete the cache. It's not like it cannot blindly take a decision saying delete everything every day. So it makes no sense, right? So that's the cache mechanism where OBIEE follows, where it maintains the cache. When it is maintaining the cache is actually is maintained internally, not only in the OBIEE. There are every place, like there is an index cache, data cache. So everywhere, like when the cache itself is, it is kind of split into two parts, index and the data, right? So when I say index, oh, sorry, let's leave it. When I say index is basically, it's a key information, and the data is actually um, the actual data. Suppose in a very good example for this kind of information is like in a book. If you take a book, you have an index, right? So which, like, it's a combination of like 20 pages, or so if I have 1,000 page book, so probably I have an index of 20-25 pages. So now if I want a particular topic, if you want a particular topic, so I don't flip through all the 1,000 pages, right? No. What I'll do, I'll go to the index and see if that particular topic is available. If that is available, now what I do, I simply see at what page it is available. Simply, I'll go to the particular page and I'll look at the topic rather than going through all the 1,000 pages and searching, like, where is this particular topic available. That's what I call it as an index. So, like you have the index for the book and even for the data. So there is an index where you point the data and you in an index pattern. So if I have, say, I define an index and the relevant data, I'll put it somewhere in the data cache. So index cache is kind of a pointers that tells where is the actual data available, like a book, right? So I go to the index, but that index will only tell me on which page the actual data available, because index itself will not contain any data. It's only a pointer that tells like in which page data is available. The same way here, if I have my OBIEE report, right? When I run a report, obviously when I have already run this report before, my data is cached, right? So when I run the report again, what happens is in the index, what it will have is it will only have a query that tells like, okay, this is the query. Okay, so when I have a query executed, so what it will do is my query will be verified against the cache, which is the index cache. So which means it automatically identifies, okay, this query is already been executed. Okay, so my criteria to identify the data is my query. Once I know that the query is already executed, so what happens? The request goes to the data cache, and from the data cache we'll retrieve the response that we already have, or the report that we already have for this query, and we take the same query and we take the same result and display it. So the advantage here is, if I have all the queries and reports dumped into one place, and for every request searching through every data is kind of useless. So we'll see the simplest way is, first of all, segregate all the queries as the indexes, so that if the same query is executed again, so identify the relevant data cache for that particular query and only go to that particular cache location and pull it. So that's much faster, right? So that's how my cache mechanism is implemented inside the OBIEE. So to make it simple, cache is local to your system, or closer to your system. Suppose if you look at the applications, like big applications and like a Google and all, the ERP applications, if they say that to improve the performance, they maintain a cache servers itself. Like there are big servers that is kept in between, which they maintain all this information as a cache, and when you search it again, and it will go to the nearest cache location and display to you. Suppose, say, if somebody search for Narendra Modi, or some person as Obama, so it will create the cache for that. And if somebody else search for the Obama again, it doesn't go all the way back to the original site and get the data. It will get it from the nearest cache location. Suppose, say, I may have a cache servers in Singapore, I may have a cache servers in UK, I may have cache servers in somewhere in Europe, or somewhere in Africa. So now when somebody from Africa access the search for Obama, so it doesn't go all the way to the US server to pull the data for about Obama, because there is already a cache server that is available in Africa. So because somebody else has already asked for Obama, searched for Obama, there is a cache entry available in the Africa server without Obama. I mean, with the data about Obama. So that will simply pull the data and display it to the. So the guy who's sitting in Africa, if you get it from the African cache server, and it's much faster rather than the request go all the way to the US, and from there it will download the information, display to you. So internally, that's how the cache mechanisms work. But again, you have to maintain. See, kind of implementing the cache is very advantage. Like you have very good performance improvements. But again, at the same time, it's very important you make sure that when the data is changed, your cache is also either updated or deleted, so that you don't look at the same old data again. Suppose it makes no sense if I run a report, I'm looking at the same result entire year. Makes no sense, right? Either I don't have a report. Okay, so that's the reason it's very important to maintain the cache um, within OBIEE, so that you don't look at the old reports. Okay, so let's go back and see what's cache in OBIEE. So how exactly it is organized. It's pretty similar to what we have discussed above, but again to detail in to explain in a detailed way. So to show you the architecture of your cache. So assuming that this is your OBIEE server, which I call it as an OBIEE server. So base server is the core server that we will identify. So probably sometime tomorrow or after tomorrow, I will kind of a little bit, I'll spend more time on the servers part, like what is a base server, presentation server, the file structure, and the log files and configuration files. I'll give you little more details about these servers so that you feel kind of comfortably using and managing these servers. So rather than kind of using them as a black box and you don't know what's happening inside it. So I'll show some light on these kind of servers and the configurations and all that stuff, so that you feel closer to them, right? So now this is my BA server. So basically, as I told you, like inside the OBIEE, the BA server is a core server which does all the processing, all the reports, execution, and everything is done by the BA server only. Okay, though I have the WebLogic server, but my BA server, WebLogic server is only the interfacing part where the request, the user logs in and the user verifies the report, user clicks on the report, and everything that is done in the WebLogic. But at the same time, the actual query execution and the data extraction is done by the BA server. So, and again, when my BA server does the data extraction part for the report, and it will give it back to the WebLogic, and where WebLogic will format and kind of present the data in a kind of a report format. All right. So now let's see in my BA server. So I technically split my BA server into two parts. So I mean, obviously, when it comes to the cache, I specify it as a cache to make it simple. So when I'm discussing about the cache as a mechanism, so as I told you, like inside the server, like you have the two parts. So the cache is split into, as usual, like there is an index cache, or which is like I can call it as a query cache. In a normal technical terminology, as we discussed, this is also called as index cache. But again, we don't call it as an index cache in OBIEE terminology, but in general terminology that we discussed, it's an index cache, which kind of which will store our queries as the index. Okay, and there is one more cache that we have is it's a data cache, or we can call it as result cache. Whatever the query that you executed, the result of the query. So result cache, where now I capture the query results into it. Okay, so you have the index cache and you have the data cache, where the index cache will the index cache will essentially have the queries inside it. So that's nothing but the queries that I maintain. So data cache is nothing but the data that is available in your cache. So I have my index cache and I have my data cache. right? So I have the query cache. So whenever my user, suppose I can give it as, I can display it as a user here. So whenever my user makes a request, whenever my user makes a request to the BA server, the request is sent to the server, and it will verify if the query is inside the cache. If the query is already inside the cache, now what it will do is it will go to the data cache. From the data cache, it will pull the data. But in case if the query is not inside the cache, if you don't have the query in the cache, then what it will do, it will go to the database. So if the query is not there in the cache, my request will directly go to the database. So from the database, it will simply go and pull the data. Right. So that's how it works. The user makes a request, user runs a report, that I can call it as a report. When the report is executed, so obviously every time you run a report, so what it actually does is it will generate a query, right? Obviously the report, end of the day, the report is nothing but a query. In a GUI form, it is a report, but internally, it's definitely a query. So the query will get executed on the BI server. That's when I execute a report, the query will be sent to the BI server. And inside the BI server, okay, it will verify if the query exists in the query cache. The query exists in the query cache. If the query exists, then what happens? It will automatically go to the data cache and it will pull the cache information in and display it to the user. Suppose if the query doesn't exist, then it means the query is not executed before. So there is no cache available here. So it doesn't go all the way here and verify the data. It will simply go to the database and it will get the data for that particular report and give it back to the user. But at the same time, while doing that, the second process, what it will do, it will also make an entry to the query cache with the new query that it is made. It also make an entry in the data cache with the result that it is received from the database. So that the next time you run the same query, it doesn't go all the way to the database again and pull the data. It will get it from the cache. So now at some point of time, if I remove this cache, this cache set, what happens? Every time you receive the request, then it will verify there is no cache available here. It will go to the database and get the data. So because the data tend to change and you cannot really maintain the same cache forever. So the BA server will also manage this cache. So you either manage it manually or you let the BA server manage it automatically by doing some settings, cache cleanup settings, which it will automatically do. But otherwise, you can also go and delete the cache manually on your own if you think uh, it's old one. I mean, there's something changed, and if you want to see that it is required to be deleted, you can manage it on your own manually. Okay. Right. So now let's see where exactly we see the cache here. So if you look at my OBIEE perspective, if I log into my repository, so if you log into the repository, if you see there is something called manage, inside the manage there is something called cache. So I can see manage cache where I have this is my cache entries. At this point of time, I don't have any cache entries available, and I would like to basically run any one of the report and see if it creates any cache entry. So let me go to my reporting solution. So I go to my reporting and I see analytics. So I'll try to create some basic report, or I try to execute any of the existing report, doesn't matter. So suppose if I try to execute any of the existing reports, say brand report, I say open. Okay, this is my brand report. If I go back to my, I have executed my brand report, right? So if I go back to my cache, and if I say, if I close this one, if I say manage cache, see, I'll see an entry here in the cache, which means with the request that I made, so it has created an entry in the cache. So this is the first time there's a new entry, so it says never used, because if I run the same again, and then it will say it is used. Okay, so this is the creation time, how long it took to create it, and how many rows available. So 3 rows available. How many columns available? See, 3 columns available. It knows everything. Okay, and it will have some its own data. So use count, how many times it's been used? None, 0 times, because it just created, right? Okay, what is the data model? Which is model BI. So repository star, and fact table that is being used, revenue. So this is kind of details about my cache when I run it. So now suppose if I go and if I say refresh the report. So I did refresh it 1 time. Suppose I did refresh it again 2 times. So now I go back here, I close this again, and I say manage cache again. Okay, so last used is what? Now it was like in the last used it was having what? Never. So which means it was never used. But again, last used has changed, right? It's 939 or 209. Okay, it's used at 209 here. Okay, now if you see here, use count is 2. If you remember, like I did refresh it what? I did refresh it twice. Right, so I refreshed it twice. So since I refreshed it twice, and it has got the data 2 times. From where it has got the data 2 times? From the cache. It doesn't really go all the way to the database. It simply got the data from the um, kind of rather than getting the data all the way from the database. What it has done, it has get the data from the cache. Okay, so that way we maintain. I mean, see, in this process we are not doing anything manually here. I'm not creating any process, and I'm not creating any query to go and insert the data to the cache and all. So this is by default. So this is a fundamental feature of your OBIEE which maintains the cache. So there is nothing that you need to do anything about it in terms of creating the cache. But if you want, you can manage this cache as well. Suppose this is one for one single query, and if I open a different report with different combination, then obviously there is one more entry created here with for that particular report. So every report has its own cache. It's not like a common cache and all the reports will have the same cache. No, every report will create its own cache, because every report is, I mean, as long as the report is different, as long as the query is different. If I create 10 reports with the same query, with the same product, brand, and revenue, if I create the same report 10 times, but it will still use the same cache. End of the day, it's not the report name that does matter. End of the day, the query that is being sent to the database is very important. So it will verify based on the query. It will give the result set. So I maintain a number of cache entries into my cache. Suppose if I look at this, so where exactly my cache is available in my file system. Suppose if I look at the file system, so the cache is nothing but here in our case it's a files internally inside my OBIEE. So we don't really use any kind of a databases to maintain the cache. So it's kind of, again, it's a file system where the data is stored in a form of the file. So if I go to the instances and instance to BA Foundation, Oracle BA Server component, I'll tell you like how to navigate to this one. I'll explain you sometime tomorrow or day after tomorrow about this. So there is inside my BA server, there is a core application. Inside that there is something called a cache available. If I look at the cache, there is a file created for this entry. whatever the entry that we are talking about, right? So for this, there is a file created. So in my file system, this is the file entry. But again, I don't even have any clue, like, which file will have what information. So I don't really manage it from the cache. Even if I try to delete it from here, if I say delete, so it says, are you sure you want to delete recycle bin? I say yes. But it says, no, the action cannot be completed because the file is open in NQ server, which is my BIE server is actually locked this file. So it doesn't really let you delete the file. So you cannot maintain the cache from the file system on its own unless you stop the server. Suppose probably when you're managing the cache, so if the server is down, you can go and you can kind of delete these files if you want. But again, that is not an ideal way of managing the cache. But if I want to delete the cache, all I can do is I can select this entry and right click and say purge. The cache is automatically deleted. So if I go back here, I don't see any entry here because my entry is deleted. So it's kind of, you're managing it from the server. So now sometimes what happens, you delete it from here, and when you run the report for the first time, in the mind of the BA server, it still thinks that there is a cache entry available. It will directly try to access the cache, and it couldn't see any cache file. Then it realizes, okay, something wrong, the cache file is not available. It will throw an error and say run it again, refresh it again. So you refresh it again. This time it has automatically identified that no, the entries are not there. So it will kind of repopulate the new entry thing, so that it will create. So that's the reason, don't manage it from the file system. So it's always better to manage it from the BI, so that when you are removing the cache, my server is also aware that the cache is not there, so that next time when you run the report, it won't go to the cache. It won't go to the cache for that particular report. It will directly go to the uh, actual database where my data exists. Okay, now let's go back and run this report again. So if I say refresh it again, see, remember it's taking time. Yeah, now so if you see the difference, it's taking a bit time. So I have created another entry again here. Suppose if I go to the report now, if I say refresh, now simple, straightforward. It did not even take any time. It was not even showing like that it's processing, because the data is already there in the cache. Okay, so that's how my cache mechanism works. But again, as I said, the important aspect of the cache is, one is creation of the cache. At the same time, maintaining the cache is also very important. So how do we maintain the cache? So we maintain the cache basically in a manual way. That is one option. So which we already did. So manual is something that we already did now, right? So where I simply went there and I deleted the cache. So there is something called automation. Okay, so what is an automation? So what is an automated way of maintaining the cache? So because rather than me being physically available and delete the cache, suppose say if I have set the cache and my new data comes in the midnight, assuming obviously, right? So usually data loads that happens over the midnight. So now say I have loaded the new data at 12 a.m. in the morning. So when I loaded the new data at 12 a.m. in the morning, and now at 1 a.m. I would like to delete the cache. So I cannot really wake up on every day at 1 a.m. and delete the cache and go to sleep again. So that's not the ideal way of doing it, right? So inside the OBIEE, you have a mechanism where you can specify how often your cache should get deleted, right? So I can go and I can configure my cache in my report. So one of the important thing that you need to remember here is, like when I discussed about the alias table, right? So another advantage of the alias table is alias table can have different cache settings than the original table. Listen, suppose if I have a product, so assuming that I create an alias table on the product, so my product table may have a cache. Suppose if I look at it here, products, right? So if I say general, so there is an option for you to configure cache. So what it says by default, this is a cacheable, which means you can cache your entries. So when it is cacheable means when you use any one of the kind of anytime you use the product table as part of your query, as part of your report, so this will cache that entries. So you have enabled the cache. It's kind of, if you don't want the cache to be enabled, then you can disable the cache. That's not a problem. But individually you can also specify for this table if you want to enable the cache or not. So again, there is one more setting that the global setting that you can do is you can see the capacity management. So there is something enable BA server cache. If I go and lock and edit configuration, so what it will do is it will edit for me, and at the same time I can unselect this box which is like a cache enable. So if I unselect this one, my server doesn't even cache anything. So it's kind of main power. So suppose if I go and if I stop your main power, it doesn't matter, like use turn on any switch, you don't get any electricity. So it doesn't really kind of the total is the total power supply is gone. Okay, that is a cache of at the server level. So enable BA server cache. So if I unselect this one, which means your cache is disabled. So your server itself is not kind of creating any cache. So rest of the configuration, rest of the things are immaterial. So even if you have the cache enabled at the table level and all, it doesn't really kind of use those settings. It's kind of it's a server level disable. Okay, and you can also control saying maximum cache entry size. So each cache entry, when it is maintaining, what is the maximum size, because I don't really want to create a cache entries of like 1 GB, 2 GB, 3 GB, very big cache entries. Maybe we don't want to create it because it will simply kind of occupy a lot of space, and so I may get space run out of space on my server. Okay, and maximum cache entries is how many entries that you maintain within the cache. Suppose say here we have like 1500 entries, which means you can maintain 1500 cache entries in your server. So after the 1500 cache entries, if you try to create any more entry, or if you try to define any more entry, it says like maximum number of entries is already there. So this kind of you're setting a limit. So it's very important to have the limit, because otherwise so you are like you're sitting unlimited. You can make any entries, you can create an entry with any size. So at some point of time, if you don't manage the cache, and in a very bigger environment, and if there are too many queries, it will simply occupy a lot of space in your system, and at some point of time it will totally makes you run out of the space on the server itself. So now the server will get crashed and all that stuff. So this is always important to set some limit here. So this is the server level setting. I simply say release configuration. So I'm not going to do any changes here, but again, you can do these changes if you want. So that is one level of configuration that you do. But the other level of configuration is basically, it's kind of the table level configuration. You can also set the cache at the table. It's kind of you are switching off a light in your room, or you are switching on. So that's kind of specific to the table. So at the table level, I can say that by default it's cacheable. If I unselect now, if you are using this table in any of the queries and your query is not cacheable, it doesn't cache anything for this particular table. So that's kind of cache settings. So I can enable it. So cache never expires, which means by default it will create the cache, but it doesn't really delete the cache unless you configure something. So there's something on the cache persistence time. So what is this cache persistence time? Is basically how often you would like to delete this cache. Suppose every 1 day. So now what happens? My VA server will remove the cache every 1 day on its own. Okay, so it's kind of you can schedule the cache to get executed based on a particular time. Otherwise, by default, the cache option is the cache never expires. So another important feature that you need to understand is for the products, right? So for the products, you have the cache enabled, right? So for the product, you have the cache enabled. So I created an alias table on the products. So this is my alias table that is on the products, right? So if I double click on my alias table, so my alias table is also having the same setting by default. But if you think like you would like to override the cache, then you can say simply disable the cache. If you see here, my physical table is having a cache, my alias table is not having the cache. What is the point of it? See, basically, what is the purpose of the alias table? So I can create multiple alias tables on one physical table. In the sense, for same products, I can create like 10 alias tables with 10 different names, with 10 different keys, and I can join it to something else, and right. So that is pretty much possible, where I can create different alias tables on the product. So now what it says is probably no one alias table which I'm using may require cache, other alias table I'm using may not require the cache. So when I think like, if I don't really need a cache on that particular table, I simply override the default feature of the table and I can disable it. So now I'm overriding and I'm disabling the cache. So now my alias table is not having. So probably I may have one more alias table on the same product, and that may have. So it's kind of, it's my choice to override the cache to define the cache. So that's what the important features that we were discussing about, which is, my alias table has two different things than the physical table. So when I say like, what is the differences between a physical table and the alias table? Simple. My alias table will have its own key. I can define my own key. Apart from the key, I cannot do anything, which means I cannot add a new column, I cannot delete the column, I cannot update the column, nothing. I can do nothing. It's kind of more or less a physical table. Only difference is I define my own key. So any of the column that is available in my table, I can define it as a key. So it's not mandatory that you have to have the same key that is available in the physical table. So the moment you create the alias table, it will get created with no key. Though there is a key available in the physical table, but it will simply ignore that key. It will create a table with no key. So I mean, just kind of revisiting that. So now, so the another example, another difference between the physical table and the alias table is alias table can have a different cache setting than the physical table. So my physical table may have like, cache enabled, but on alias table I can specify, or I can disable the cache. So that's how the cache differs from the physical table to the alias table. But it can be the same if you don't really override anything. It follows the same as physical table. So now what I can do is I can go back here and I can disable the cache for this particular table, or I can set the persistence time. So what happens, my cache is cleaned up automatically on its own on a time to time basis. You don't really need to go and delete the cache manually from the server. So there is one more setting that we have inside the server, which is uh, let me explain that. So there is one setting or one feature that is available within the cache, which is if I go to the tools and if I look at the utilities, if I go to the tools and utilities, there is something called um, Oracle BI event table. So there is a mechanism which is event tables mechanism, where based on the event tables I delete the cache automatically. Based on the event tables, I delete the cache automatically. So I simply say execute. So what is my event tables is Oracle provides a simple table, so which is called an event table. So what is this event table is all about is basically it's a kind of entries that we make into this table. Suppose if I go back here, if I have to explain you. So now what happens is like whenever you are making a query, it is verifying if there is a query available, it will go to the cache and it will get the data. But again, how do I know like when is my data is actually getting updated here? Because I don't know, right? So if my BA server has to know that when this data is actually getting updated, so assuming that say there is a job which will try to clean up the cache, assuming. So when does my job will clean up the cache? My job will verify if there is any new data available. Okay, if my job get to know that there is some new data available, then it will simply run and it will simply delete the cache for those entries. So whatever the entry that is a new entry made it, right? So probably it is loaded through ETL process or something, where my ETL will actually load my data to the database. So on a time to time basis, when my ETL loads the data to the database, so what does my process will do? My process will simply make an entry to my database from here. Okay, so whenever there is a new data in the database, my job will get to know that there is a new data available, and when there is a new data available, it will go and delete the cache. So how do I know that when there is a new data available? So inside the database, when my ETL job is loading, we'll ask them to make an entry. That is what I call it as a BI event tables. So whenever there is a new data, suppose assuming that there is a product data loaded now, my ETL is loading my product data to my data warehouse. Or so when it is loading the data to the data warehouse for the with the new product entries, I'll also ask the ETL team saying that there is a entry available in the table. There is an entry available in the product table. So when there is an entry available in the product table, what happens is my the new process BI event tables will verify this table. Will check this table. If there is entry, I mean, we have a schedule in the BI event table. Suppose every 15 minutes or every 30 minutes that it will run. It's up to you. You can configure your own schedule. Assuming that this job is running every 15 minutes, what it will do? It will go to this event tables. So BI event tables. So it will see if there is a entry for this product is available. Yes, if there is an entry for products is available, which means there is a new entry created inside the product. So which means my product cache is no more new because there's a new entry added to the product table means my product table is updated with the new data. So when I know that the product table is updated with the new data, and I should make sure that the cache for the product is should be deleted. So if I see an entry for the product here, when my job runs next 15 minutes, it will come and it will verify and see that there is a new entry available for product. So what my job will do is it will simply go here and delete the cache for the product. So that's how you manage the cache automatically by with the help of Oracle BI event tables. So the event tables is basically a mechanism where we implement to automate the cache deletion. So if I look at here, I have my if I go to the utilities and if I see the Oracle BI event tables, where it has a mechanism where it will ask you for the table, the event table that we create, right? We should have the event table somewhere. I mean, but again, I have not actually imported the event table, but essentially what happens is this provides a script for the event table. So if I have to show you the script for the event table, I have to go to my BA server and instances and instance to BI Foundation, BA server core application, and there's a schemas available, which are the default schemas available. So one of the default schema that is provided is SAPT. EPT stands for event pool table. Okay, APT for Oracle. So I have a SAPT.Oracle, which is a script that is available for my Oracle database. Okay, so now I simply edit it just to take a look at it. So what it has, I say edit this table. Probably doesn't really look good. Let's edit in Edit Plus. Right, so this is my event table. If you see here, this is a simple table script. You can also run this script on your own in a create table. So it has the name of the table is SA underscore NQ underscore EPT, and you have like an updated time, date type, timestamp, database name, catalog name, schema name, table name. Right, so it will have all these entries here. So now with these entries, if I make an entry here, and it will automatically remove the cache for that particular entry. So what I can do is I can go and I already have that table, I believe, in my BA sample which I created sometime before. So let me re-import the table. Let me import the table again so that I can show you how to select this one. BA sample, my password BA sample. So now I can connect and I'd like to see if the same table is available in my BA sample schema. By default it won't be available, but again I must have I have executed the same script before on this particular schema. So I created this table inside this BA sample schema. If not for you, like, and it's not, since it's not available, you can go to the BA sample and you can simply run this query that is available, right? Simple. So I can add SA underscore NQ underscore EPT. Okay, so this table is added. Finish. Now if I look at here, the new table is added. So if I right click and if I say physical diagram object and direct join. So what is it I'm doing? I'm trying to see if my SA underscore n s underscore nq underscore ept is linked to any other table. No, it's a simple standalone table. So that has to be a standalone table. Otherwise, it will give an error. So it doesn't allow a table with joins to be used as event pool tables. You can create your own table also if you want. But again, if I select event table execute, so it is asking me to choose one of the table from here, and I have my s underscore nq underscore ept as a add. So I have added this table, and I can set the polling frequency to any time, like in 10 minutes or 15 minutes or 30 minutes of my choice. And I say okay. Now what happens? From now on, every 15 minutes or every 30 minutes, whatever the timing that I specified there, it will go to this table and it will see if there is new entries for any of these tables, any new data available kind of table. Then if there is an entry, then it will automatically delete. So it could be through ETL process, or it could be like through, you can maintain your own mechanism, like suppose if there is a table, then you define a trigger on the table. So when there is a new entry added to the table, or when that kind of any entry modified in the table, so you would like to make a trigger, and you'll insert a row into this table for that particular table. So then what happens? When it sees the next time, since there is a trigger on the database, which means the data on the database is either changed or updated, or either created or updated. So it will delete the cache for that particular table. So it's your choice how you implement the mechanism, but that's how it actually works. So more or less, like cache is very important, and of course now we don't really have much scope in OBIEE for the cache. It's internally managed. You don't have much settings to do, or you don't have kind of sophisticated configurations to maintain a different cache server or something. You don't have it, but it's one of the feature where it will internally create the cache for you. So that way, you make sure that your report's performance is improved, because see, there's no point of running the same report directly on the database, like, and if the report is used 100 times in a day, so rather than me going to the database all the way 100 times and pull the loads of the data, and loading my server at the same time loading the database, and which kind of causing the performance issue on both the sides, I prefer to maintain a local copy and use it. So preferably in a data warehouse environment. If it is a real-time environment, it makes no sense, because real-time you always kind of get a new data, right? So if I'm talking about OLTP systems where I'm doing the reporting on the OLTP system, my data is always created new. But again, when I discuss about the data warehouse implementations, right? In the data warehouse, you don't really load the data very often, right? So maybe you load the data every day, or every week, so depending on the type of transaction, type of data. So let's assume that you load the data every day. When you load the data every day, so the data is loaded only once, the data is changed only once. So when I know that the data is changed only once, why unnecessarily go all the time to the database and pull it? Rather, I use it cache for the entire day. But when I know that there is a new data available in the database, just delete the cache that is available. So when you run the report for the first time of the day, whoever runs the report for the first time, then the request will go to the database and will get the data, and a cache is created. So till next day, or till next you see that there is a change in the table, so the cache is not deleted, the same cache will be used. So that way, we improve the performance rather than going all the way back to the database and pulling the data. Make use of the cache that is available, which is in the local, and give it as a result to the users. That's how we improve the performance. Any questions on this, or anything that you don't understand in the cache? See, practically, then there is nothing much that you can do on the cache, but theoretically, it's very, very important to understand what is a cache, how does it work. So settings, in terms of the number of settings, you don't really have much. But again, so tomorrow when you kind of go to the interview, or when you talk to somebody, when you want to understand how the cache works, so that is very important theoretical aspect that you need to remember and understand and talk. Okay, so if there are no questions, then we'll continue tomorrow.